Hello everyone. Today's topic is untrusted data. Hope you guys are well. So, a simple overview about untrusted data. In the application security community, it is common to talk about untrusted data. Talk about any type of injection attack, SQLI, XSS, XXE, or many more. And one of the first terms mentions in untrusted data, in some cases, it is also known as user data. While we hear the phrase all the time, are we sure everyone understands what it means? What is untrusted data? It is important that anyone associated with creating and testing applications untrusted the concept of untrusted data. Unfortunately, it can get a little fuzzy as you start getting into different situations. Let's start with the most simplistic definition. Untrusted data is a data that is controlled by the user client side. While this is very simple, it is often confusing to many. When we saw controlled by the user, what does that really mean? For some, they stop at data in text boxes or drop down lists, overlooking hidden fields, request headers like cookies or many other things. From the client perspective, we need to include any data that could be manipulated before it gets to the server. That includes cookie values, hidden from fields, user agent, referrer field, and any other item that is available. A common mistake is to assume if there is no input box on the page for the data, it cannot be manipulated. Thanks to browser plugins and web proxies, that is far from the truth. All of the data is vulnerable to manipulation. And server side? What about on the server side? Can we assume everything on the server is trusted? First, let's think about the resources we have server side. There are configuration files, file system objects, databases, web services, or many more. Like, what would you trust out of these systems? It is typical to trust configuration files stored on the file system of the web server. Think your web.xml or web.config files. These are typically deployed with the application files and are not easy to update. Access to these files is production should be very limited, and it would not be easy to open them up to others for manipulation. What about data from the database? Often I hear people trusting the database. This is a dangerous option. Let's take an example. In database example, do you have a web application that uses a database to store its information? The web application does a good job of input validation, type, length, or many more things. For any data that can be stored in the database, since the web application does good input validation, it lacks on output encoding because it assumes the data in the database is good. Today, maybe no other apps write to that database. Maybe the only way to get data into the database is either SQL script run by a DBA or through the app with good input validation. Even here there are weaknesses. What if the input validation misses and attack failed? Sure, the validation is good, but does it catch everything? What if a rogue DBA manipulates the script to put malicious data into the databases? Could happen. Now think about the future when the application owner requests a mobile application to use the same database, or they decide to create a user interface for data that previously was not available for update in the application previously. Now the data that was thought to be safe, even though it probably wasn't, is now even less trusted. The mobile application or other interfaces may not be as strained as thought. The above application has been seen in real applications numerous trusts. What constitutes untrusted data? The integrity is not verifiable. The intent may be malicious. The data may include payloads such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and binaries containing malware. The use of input sanitization and trusted data that might constitute a risk is frequently sanitized, including characters such as these characters: less than, greater than, slash, semicolon, double quotation, single quotation. Explicitly rejecting specific characters is called a blacklist approach. It's very implicit. This is what could be bad, so everything else must be okay. It's also easy to be incomplete. Explicitly accepting only approved characters is called a whitelist approach. It's very explicit. This is what we know is good, so we are only going to allow this. It's more comprehensive. Input sanitization. Input sanitization is a cybersecurity measure of checking, cleaning, and filtering data inputs from users' APIs and web services of any unwanted characters and strings to prevent the injection of harmful codes into the system. Hackers use remote file inclusion (RFI) and injection attacks such as SQL injection (SQLI) and cross-site scripting like XSS to exploit the gap in the interaction between the website and the server. They can encode special characters and execute unauthorized actions that compromise security. With input sanitization in place, these types of attacks can be prevented. An application receives queries and requests from untrusted and malicious attacks input and requirements eliminating. Sanitizing inputs, whitelist sanitizing, blacklist sanitizing, and escape sanitizing. Whitelist allows only valid characters and code strings. Blacklist cleans the input by removing unwelcomed characters such as line breaks, extra white space, tabs, and tags. And escape sanitizing rejects invalid data requests and strips inputs in order not to be seen as codes. Benefits of input sanitization. Input sanitization is by no means a perfect means to ward off injection attacks and pernicious infiltration of a web server, but it has some advantages such as providing a perimeter defense against common cyber attacks, preventing some forms of remote file inclusion and injection attacks, protecting the system from malicious code intrusions, keeping the integrity of T. And from the user's browser, data input travels through GET request, POST request, and cookies, which hackers can edit, modify, and manipulate to gain access to the web server. Input sanitization serves as a strainer to filter encoded data as it moves into the web server, and this can be done in three ways I discuss about whitelist, blacklist, escape sanitization. So that's it. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching. Hello everyone, let's talk about output encoding for cross-site scripting. Let's start it. XSS cross-site scripting. Don't display untrusted user input. Sanitize all input. Encode all output. HTTP headers. Don't insert untrusted content. Some ASP.NET controls don't encode output, and use NT-XSS library rather than HTTP utility. Output encoding. What is cross-site scripting? I discussed it about previous previous video. Cross-site scripting or XSS is a form of attack on a web application which involves executing code on a user's browser. Output encoding is a defense against XSS attacks. How to correctly encode output? Protecting from XSS attacks requires developers to consider how data is being displayed on a page. If the data could come from a user's input in any way, including through the site's URL, then the correct encoding of the output has to be considered. Since most web applications at TTS are built through JavaScript or backend frameworks, and this guide will go over output encoding issues by those frameworks in addition to plain JavaScript. So identifying an XSS at risk. This is trusted. Look at this picture. Strong, search for strong is trusted. Stored XSS exploits occurs when an attacker injects dangerous content into a data store that is later read and included in dynamic content. From an attacker's perspective, the optional place to inject malicious content is in an area that is displayed to either many users or particularly interesting users. These days, many users have password managers that autofill their passwords. You can take advantage of this by creating a password input, reading out the autofilled password and sending it to your own domain. And this technique avoids most of the problems associated with stealing cookies and can even gain access to every other account where the victim has reused the same password. The primary disadvantage of this technique is that it only works on users who have password manager that performs password autofill. Look at this, exploiting an XSS risk. Here is markup language. What is not secure and web vulnerabilities. Output encoding concepts. The search term was never intended to be markup. Only ever data XSS attacks are possible because the app allows an XSS payload to break out of the data context and change the markup context to mitigate the risk of XSS. We want to make sure the search term appears on the screen exactly as it was entered. So how do we write markup to display? And this is the writing procedure. I injo slash I inside clone double quotation. Output encoding contexts for I injo slash I inside double quotation, like HTML and LT, many thing like this. You guys can watch CSS. CSS format is slash I injo slash I slash JavaScript and URL LDP LDAP distinguished name and HTML attribute HTML from URL LDAP filter LDAP path XML So guys, this is for it. Hope you guys liked it. And in this video I showed exploiting an XSS risk, output encoding concepts, output encoding contexts for I injo I, Hope you guys liked it and thanks for watching. Hello everyone, let's talk about clickjacking. So what is clickjacking? Clickjacking or click hijacking is a type of cyber attack where an unseen malicious link is placed over a website's user interface because clickjacking occurs on an invisible iframe layer loaded on top of a legitimate page. Visitors usually cannot identify when a clickjacking attack is taking place. So it's actually manipulate user. There are two victims in a clickjacking attack: the host website and the visitor. The host website is used as a platform to facilitate the clickjacking attack, and the visitor becomes a victim to the specific intention of the attack. Some common types of clickjacking attacks include login credential threat, webcam or microphone activation, invitation of malware downloads, authorization of money transfers, unsolicited product purchases, and identifying location. Clickjacking intentions are not limited to this list because user interfaces can be cloaked with any type of link, UI readdressing, and the destructive options are limitless. Clickjacking examples, like here are some examples of the most notorious types of clickjacking attacks. Money transfer scams. In this UI readdress attack, an attacker tricks you into clickjacking a link on a malicious page that authorizes the transfer of money from your bank account. Here's an overview of the process. First, the victim is presented with a seemingly innocent website that could be loaded from a link in an email. Such websites usually promote an irresistible offer like a free gift or a holiday deal. When the website loads and the victim clicks the bottom to claim their free gift, they're actually clicking on a funds transfer confirmation link on an invisible web application layer. If the victim is logged onto their bank at the time, their money will instantly be transferred to the attacker's account. While the unsolicited transfer is taking place in the background, the victim is redirected to a page with more information about their free gift. So let's go to hack yourself first dot tryhunt dot tryhunt.com. Press enter. You guys can create here free gift or scam for clickjacking. Takes some time. The page is loading slowly. By using inspect language, any page you guys can gather some information what is needed for clickjacking, like in this way. Click inspect in this page. Here's some header files, HTML files, console, sources, network performance. Let's go hackyourselffirst.tryhand.com/win surface .pro. Go this site for clickjacking, but unfortunately my internet connection problem. This is the Win Surface Pro, and here want to win a Surface Pro. In the two below, just it's clickjacking, and two boxes is there for username and password. Attacker create this and send to the victim, and victim fulfill the password and give their password, email or account name, and get trapped. This is how you guys create clickjacking and target your victim and gather many information by using inspect language. So the next thing is the X-frame options XFO header. The XFO header is returned by the website and specifies how the page may be framed. The browser then addresses to one of the following policies: no framing allowed, same origin, only allow the page to appear in a frame on another page in the same site, and allow from URL, only allow the page to appear in a frame on the specified site. So that's it. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching. Hello everyone, hope you guys are well. Today's topic is basics of XSS and anti-forgery tokens. Who has access unable to load sharing information. So let's start it. Cross-site scripting or XSS. Look at this picture. So what is cross-site scripting? Cross-site scripting XSS is an attack in which an attacker injects malicious executable scripts into the code of trusted application or website. Attackers often initiated an XSS attack by sending a malicious link to a user and inducing the user to click it. If the app or website lacks proper data sanitization, the malicious link executes the attacker's chosen code on the user's system. As a result, the attacker can steal the user's active session cookie. How does cross-site scripting work? Look at this example. Script =new /*, then image and image source, then http site plus document dot cookie plus document dot location, then script. While the payload is usually JavaScript, XSS can take place using any client-side language to carry out a cross-site scripting attack. An attacker injects a malicious script into a user. Attackers can also carry out an attack by modifying a request. If the web app is vulnerable to XSS attacks, the user supplied input executes as code. For example, in the request below, the script displays a message box with the text XSS http www.site.com/page.php script alert, then inside the bracket XSS text box. There are many ways to trigger an XSS attack. For example, the execution could be triggered automatically when the page loads or when a user hovers over specific elements of the page. Potential consequences of cross-site scripting attacks include these, like capturing the keystroke of a user, redirecting a user to a malicious website, running web browser-based exploits, obtaining the cookie information of a user who is logged into a website. In some cases, the XSS attack leads to complete compromise of the victim's account Attackers can trick users into entering credentials on a fake form, which provides all the information to the attacker. Hello everyone, let's talk about output encoding for cross-site scripting. Let's start it. XSS cross-site scripting. Don't display untrusted user input. Sanitize all input. Encode all output HTTP headers. Don't insert untrusted content. Some ASP.NET controls don't encode output, and use NT-XSS library rather than HTTP utility. Output encoding. What is cross-site scripting? I discussed it about previous previous video. Cross-site scripting or XSS is a form of attack on a web application which involves executing code on a user's browser. Output encoding is a defense against XSS attacks. How to correctly encode output. Protecting from XSS attacks requires developers to consider how data is being displayed on a page. If the data could come from a user's input in any way, including through the site's URL, then the correct encoding of the output has to be considered. Since most web applications at TTS are built through JavaScript or backend frameworks, and this guide will go over output encoding issues by those frameworks in addition to plain JavaScript. So identifying an XSS at risk. This is trusted. Look at this picture. Strong, search for strong in trusted. Stored XSS exploits occurs when an attacker injects dangerous content into a data store that is later read and included in dynamic content. From an attacker's perspective, the optional place to inject malicious content is in an area that is displayed to either many users or particularly interesting users. These days, many users have password managers that autofill their passwords. You can take advantage of this by creating a password input, reading out the auto-filled password and sending it to your own domain. And this technique avoids most of the problems associated with stealing cookies and can even gain access to every other account where the victim has reused the same password. The primary disadvantage of this technique is that it only works on users who have password manager that performs password autofill. Look at this, exploiting an XSS risk. Here is markup language. What is not secure and web vulnerabilities. Output encoding concepts. The search term was never intended to be markup. Only ever data XSS attacks are possible because the app allows an XSS payload to break out of the data context and change the markup context to mitigate the risk of XSS. We want to make sure the search term appears on the screen exactly as it was entered. So how do we write markup to display? And this is the hey there, let's talk about cross-site scripting attack, XSS attack. Learning about cross-site scripting attacks, how they work and how they can be abused by an attacker takes more than just an explanation of a theory with a stripped down example like as the cliche goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So consider this next chapter to be your own cross-site scripting photo gallery. In this chapter, in this tutorial, we will look at examples of real life. So as we see, XSS attacks are not to be ignored, whether stealing user password data from Firefox, getting earbound at local hotspot, or finding a vulnerable application where you can insert a persistent XSS to own anyone who visits a site. JavaScript malicious software is a force to be ranked with. Let's talk about XSS exploited. The following represents like JavaScript code that we came up with to steal the user password. First, we created a few elements that define a frame sheet. This could also be an iframe, but sometimes it is nice to go old school. The specifics. The previous section of code is what does the trick. First, override the action of the login form. This particular approach assumes the form has no name. Otherwise, we could use the get elements by name method to locate and change the form action. Next, write the target user value to the user field. Once the data is written in the field, we simulate a user interacting with the username field and then the password field via the focus function, and wait 2 seconds for the password to show up and then submit the user password data to evilsite.com server. So 6xs offenders. Cross-site scripting attacks can do more than just steal credentials or spy on a user. They can also be used to defame or attack a person's reputation. This section illustrates this point by exploiting the XSS vulnerable website like family watchdogs.arch, which is devoted to the tracking of sexual offenders. Under normal conditions, a concerned citizen would enter in a known name or a location to see if there are any potential sexual predators living and or working in the area. If available, the website provides the address of the convicted offender as well as location on a map and some details of the crime. And this type of website is a great resource for concerned parents, but the information has been known to cause community backlash against listed offenders. As a result, this kind of site must be responsible to not only protect the offenders who have served their time but also prevent the innocent from becoming an unsuspecting victim. Unfortunately, as you will see, it is almost trivial to create false content within this site that could seriously harm a person's character. It should be noted that our example site one of many. We spent a couple of hours lightly testing other states like national list www.nsopr.gov, like this District of Columbia frame replacement, like this New Mexico. So the question is, what a person with malicious intent do with one of these vulnerable sites? Let's give an example, like a user simply types in their search criteria and hits the search button to gain access to the information listed in display menu, and clicked data is posted to a show name list.asp page that searches a database and lists the matching offenders. Since this XSS example is through a post method only, a malicious person would have to use a post redirect or flash script to facilitate the attack. The information is undoubtedly valuable, however, it is trusted. Unfortunately, the answer is no. The reason is that show. Now let's talk about how you guys can building the exploit code. To test this, create a pop-up string that would close out the CV1 EV1 keywords value, add an alert function and then clean up the broken code like alert xss text equal ASDF. Once the web page was rendered, we were rewarded with a pop-up window. We again viewed the search and found some result like script insert custom events, a simple script. At this point, search function at Equifax was vulnerable to attack. Next, needed to find a way to turn the vulnerability into a valuable resource. To successfully inject JavaScript that worked and would not raise the attention of the victim, we would have to overcome two obstacles. Like the first is that we could not use any of characters in our injected code. The second issue was that our injection point was near the end of the page, which meant we had to somehow gain control of the page's content and overwrite it with our own selection. Fortunately, the first issue is not a serious concern thanks to the string from char code function that can convert a decimal value into its corresponding American Standard Code for information interchange ASCII value. In this case, we would use the string dot from char code 60 to represent any characters and string from, and next we had to find a way to gain control over the page, and this proved to be fairly easy thanks to the web developers use of it div tags. In particular, the div id equal content and div id gave us the perfect targets because they wrapped around the existing search results, search from and right column space. Since we want our victim to believe they are at the main entry to the login sign up page, we don't want the leftover search data to be resident on the page. So this is it. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching. Hey there, welcome to another video in cross-site scripting attack part 2. So in this part I want to discuss you guys about owning the singular express mail user, the express mail personal edition and solution, and a 7.com, and the AC kid aka custom session ID, the inbox, like this. So let's talk about first owning the singular express mail user. Singular is one of the top cellular networks providers in the US. While the majority of the subscribers only use their cellular GSM service, Singular also offers data services that allow the user to access the internet via their Edge and gRPS networks. As part of this service, Singular includes the Express Mail Personal Edition application, which allows a remote user to have access to their emails and documents via a browser. While an excellent concept, the web application contains numerous cross-site forgery request vulnerabilities that allows a malicious person full access to the subscriber's inbox and attachments and more. This section takes a look at the application and the flaws that make it a dangerous proposition for any corporate user. The Express Mail Personal Edition solution is a solution offered by Singular that allows remote users to access their email and view documents that reside on the host PC. In short, a remote user logs into the expressmail.singular.com subscriber website, and the web application then establishes a secure socket layer SSL protected tunnel back to the client that is running on the host computer. If the subscriber checks their inbox, the client program will log into the server. Post Office Protocol POP, Internet Message Access Protocol MAP, exchange or behave of the user, retrieve the email subject list and relay that information to the web application for the user to view, and the user then clicks on email subject, which is then pulled from the server by the client and pushed back to the web application. If the user selects the documents button, the client will obtain a file listening from the specified folder and relay the list of the web application. When a file name is clicked, The client program will push the selected file to the web application where it will either be available for download or displayed in the browser. An added benefit of having remote access to files on the PC is that a user can attach any file to a new email. Express Mail will automatically tie the file and email together when it is submitted. As a concept, the idea is clever and useful. A subscriber can tote around just a personal digital assisted PDA and stay connected to their corporate network over an encryption connection. And in addition, since all the documents reside on the remote system, the user can save space on their PDA and mitigate some of the risk of a lost device. While nice for the user, this type of program is a potential nightmare for the security minded because it opens up an unmonitored backdoor into the network. Most firewalls will ignore in traffic because it is over port 443, the same port used to transmit secure web traffic. In addition, since the traffic is encrypted, intrusion prevention systems will not be able to examine the data. Finally, the average users can't install the software on their PC, and the network administrator will never know. While there are some undeniable risks or not. Let's talk about 7.com. Before examining the ex-personal solution, it is important to note that the connection between Singular and the company 7, according to the 7.com's website, 7 is a global provider of software that enables mobile operators, internet email providers, and service providers to offer their subscribers secure, low-cost, real-time access to business and personal email applications. The reason this company matters to Singular users is because the Express Mail program is nothing more than a slightly customized solution from 7.in. In fact, 7 has been chosen by 100 leading mobile operators and service providers worldwide, including Bharti, Singular Wireless, Estelate Global Telecom, and KDDI Corp. In other words, if a bug or vulnerabilities are found in Singular web application, chances are the same problem exists for other companies. Carries consider this as we continue through the rest of this section. The AC Kit custom session ID. Our research into this program employed the use of BARP covered. We used this program monitor the hypertext transfer protocol HTTP headers from value and keep track of our history during the review. So after executing BARP, configuring our browser to work with the proxy and loading up the entry page like expressmail.singular.com subscriber, we started to look around. Upon login, first notice the use of cookie with the content like a cookie and ID. We are curious then as to what these values meant in cookies and ID. So we logged in and out a few times and deducted that the browser was a static value tied to our browser, and the AC key was the session tracker. Fortunately, the session is encrypted, so a sniper will not be able to view the cookie. Therefore, the only way this could become an issue of an attacker could somehow execute JavaScript code on the target's browser to grab the cookie data. The inbox. We proceed to go through the inbox part of the site. Nothing, the key files used and their variables. The outline result is inbox page get subscriber /114 inbox and ASID service ID. Include this view delete message, view attachment, and compose send message. The document folder. Next, focused our attention on the documents folder. Clicking into the folder, we noticed that the URL referenced a document HTTP and appeared to be performing GET request. We then selected a file called sample.html from our folder and clicked on the link to open it up, and again a new GET request and the sample HTML file opened up in a new browser window. Email cross linkage, and take a moment and review how the emails and documents are created, composed, deleted, and viewed. In particular, pay attention to the get versus the post request. The only post request is the compose message function. All the other requests are get requests whose password, their variables and values in the URL. So that's it, guys. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching.
So in this lecture we are going to be talking about understanding the web server. So what is web server? So a web server is a computer that runs website, and it's a computer program that distributes web pages as they are requested. The basic objective of the web server is to store, process and deliver web pages to the users. This intercommunication is done by using hypertext transfer protocol, which means HTTP. And these web pages are mostly static content that includes HTML documents, images, style sheets, text, etc. Apart from HTTP, a web server also supports SMTP, which is simple mail transfer protocol, and FTP, which is file transfer protocol, for emailing and for the transfer and storage. These are the latest netcraft that's as about mid 2019, and they show over the past couple of decades how the web server and the landscape has been changed. Now clearly in recent years it's been pretty patchy and Microsoft IIS, and we have also seen that Nginx gaining market share since about 2008, and a raft of other small one making up to the reminder that the web server footprinting on the internet today. Now the reason I am showing you this to illustrate that there is some degree variation in the number of servers that are out there, and when you start talking about risk in servers, there are unique risks in the individual web server that implements, and there are risks that you will find in a patchy that you won't find in a IIS, and vice versa, of course. And the same goes all of the services as well, and we are going to mostly looking at the common platform on the risk throughout this lecture, although we will delve into more specifics and particularly about IIS simply as a way of demonstrating how web server can be at risk, and certainly there will be comparable examples for the brand of web servers as well. But this will give you a good idea and what sorts of things that you should be looking for. So now I want to give you a bit of example of how much goes into making a web server that function. So let's take a look at how IIS does request the processing. So let's talk through the HTTP request processing in IIS. Now I don't want to focus specifically on IIS in this lecture. It's more to give you an indication of just how much is going on a modern day web servers. So for example, when you look at the way a client makes a request for a resource, as that request comes into a IIS via the internet, so it hits the HTTP protocol stack. Now this is running on a kernel mode, so all the requests share a virtual space, and in other words the kernel's mode delivers a not isolated from the other drivers that operating the system itself, but once it intercepted by the HTTP, so it contacts the Windows activation server running inside the SBC host. Now this is in a years of mode. So now we have got individual application which normally equates to individual websites logically isolated from each other, and as I said earlier, we'll talk about sandboxing more later on. So in this lecture I am now the activation server, then request configuration information from the configuration store. So this is an application like host.com, and the www service then receive that configuration information. So in this include things like the application pool and the site configuration, that the service from www service can then use that configuration information to configure HTTPS, which then allows the Windows Activate service to start a worker process for the application pool which the request was made. Now these application pools provide the application via the W3 WPX. So again each application tends to have it all own, which sandbox it from the hours or the worker process from it in there, then process the request and return it to as a response to HTTP. So which eventually means that the client can receive the response over the internet. Now again this is a very specific IIS implementation, and it's worthwhile seeing how one of the major web service on the internet today operates, particularly when it comes to the isolation of process. So hopefully that gives you a bit of sense that there is actually quite a bit going on inside a web server when it processes a request. So let's talk about footprinting and reconnaissance. Footprinting and reconnaissance is a method of gathering all the information about the target machine. So it is the first step of hackers before hacking into it. They collect all information such as details of website, what are the IP address, which ports are open, details of the network, details of the organization, and host details. So there are two ways to collect information about target system. First one is active. So in this type of footprinting, hackers make direct contact with the target system to collect the information, and the second one is passive. So in this type of footprinting, hackers make an indirect contact with target system to collect information. The main objective of footprinting is to collect all the information about target system. Hence, target may be a single host or organization network. So first of all is network. So types of server that used in the network, and then all the IP used in network, number of clients connected in network, website used in network, or details about the firewall that used in network, details about intrusion detection system, and all the routing protocols used to transfer the data. So, and the second one is organization, which is details structure of organization, number of employee working in an organization, phone number of the organization, location of organization branch, complete history of organization, and the business organization. And the last one is host, who is takes the details information about the system such as MAC, IP, or OS version, or many more. Social media profile for gathering personal information about ISP that used, details of mobile device used by the target. There are 5 ways used by hackers to hack target system. So first one is footprinting, then scanning to ghost, gaining access, then maintaining access, then is clear log. So advanced level of footprinting by search engine. So first one is in URL. So it gets all the URL used in search website. Then in title, which gets the all title of pages of search website. Then related, get all the page related to the search website. File type, get the file that are searched in they get the file that are searched in a search. In text, returns all that contain the search term in the pages. So, and there are a couple of tools that are used in this, like some of the common used tools for footprinting. The first one is Maltigos, then Domain Name Analyzer Pro, then Webstructor, then Whois, and the last one is WebText. So that's all about footprinting and reconnaissance. So in this lecture we are going to be talking about directory traversal of enumeration crawling. So let's talk about directory traversal. So directory traversal or path traversal is a HTTP exploit. It exploits a security misconfiguration on a web server to access data that is stored outside the server root directory. A successful directory traversal attempts enable attacker to view a restricted files and sometimes also execute the commands on the targeted server. Typically, a directory traversal attack exploits web browsers. This means that all the server accepting unvalidated input data from web browser that are vulnerable to the attack. To launch this attack, threats actors often scan through a directory tree, which is where we can locate paths to the restricted files on the web servers. The web server receives a request and appends the host directory specified by the user to directory of the web pages, which is this, and this creates a full path of this. So in system like Unix, the element like this traverse a directory to the file system, and malicious users accept to the host like this. So malicious user can use this attack method to access secrets and sensitive information like password and database credential. They can also exploit the vulnerability to carry out further enumeration of the system and obtain the information they need to enable and combine attack through vectors like LFI and RFI. Let's talk about a couple of examples of traversal. First one is simple directory traversal, which is // attack. The simplest example of a directory traversal attack is when an application displays or allows the user to download a file via the URL parameter. For example, if the user provides the file name like document.pdf and the website downloads the file to the user computer via this link. So if the website hosted a Unix or Linux system, website files are typically stored on /www directory, which is the two directory above the root. The attacker can exploit this, passing this as the file name like this, So if the application does not sanitize the input, it uses the attack's string directly into a system call that switches to the root and then allows the attacker to access the etc directory. It then allows the attacker to access the protected password file. A similar attack can be performed on a Windows using the /string. Second one is using cookie for directory traversal. In many cases, cookie reference directories on a web server to load files requires for a website. This exposed on a site on a directory traversal attack. For example, consider a cookie that accesses a file to a load and new design templates for a website. So in this scenario, as you can see in here, the name of the file is stored in the design cookie. As you can see, design cookie, and append to a path because there is no validation of this design variable, as attacker can get help request that modifies the cookie's value to design is equal to like password directory. So the web server would then perform a system call that load the password file instead of the design template. Like from here, they'll just include a password or directory of a password, then they'll just simply go to this directory. So here are several ways you can use to prevent path traversal attack or directory traversal attack. So first one is developers should validate user input that accept from the browsers. Input validation can help ensure that attackers are restricted from using common techniques like SQL injection, which violates access privilege and may grant access or attacker access to a root directory. Application should use filters to block suspicious user input. Most web applications employ filters to block URLs that contain commands as well as escape nodes commonly employed by the attackers. Administrators should keep software up to date, including web server software and the underlying operating system, and apply all security patches. The practice of regularly patching software can significantly reduce security risk and reduce the chance of exploitation. Enumeration is a technique used to detect attack vectors in system. Input vectors enumeration offers a systematic evaluation to all input vectors. The goal is to learn which specific part of a web application is vulnerable to input validation bypassing. So tester can do this by itemizing all the application components that can accept user input such as HTTP, POST and GET calls, HTML forms and file uploads. So here are some of the aspects to consider while testing this concept. So can you find a parameter which can potentially be used for file related operations? So for example this, or can you detect any user file operations such as this, or variable names for example such as this. So the next phase of this security testing process involves analyzing all input validation function in tested web application. So quickly test web application for directory traversal vulnerabilities. You can use this for couple of following techniques like insert relative paths into the file existing to your web server. For example, like on Linux web server, you can send to the password directory and check whether a system is vulnerable to certain tricks like a / removal that uses a %encoder value like %2e, %2e, %2f, similar like this. You can check for file extension for adding null bytes like %00 before you insert a valid extension. So manually implementing the techniques can be more like time consuming and also error prone for large web application. Instead of doing like this manually, you can use a automated tool. So these are the automatic tools that commonly used to automatically analyze input validation. First one is SAST, which is static application security testing. So these tools review the source code of the application when it is not running. So SAST checks and try to identify evidence of known insecure practices and vulnerabilities. And SAST solution SAST solution employ white box techniques. The second one is DAST, which is dynamic application security testing. So DAST tools that communicate with the application through its front end in order to identify the vulnerabilities. A dynamic application security testing tools does not need any access to your source code. Rather, it simulates real attack using a black box strategy. Security checks are performed while executing or running the application or code under the review. So it also involves fuzzing, a technique which is used to submit random and malformed data as input of the web application, using it to uncover the directory traversal vulnerabilities. So HTTP fingerprint is a relatively new topic of discussion in the context of application security. One of the biggest challenges of maintaining a high level of network security is to have a complete and accurate inventory of a network assets. Web servers and web applications have now become a part of the scope of a network security assessment exercise. A fingerprint or HTTP fingerprint is defined as like the impression of a fingerprint on any surface. Also, an impression of the line that upon the fingertip taken up the purpose of identification. Sometimes the identification as a trait, trace or characteristics revealing origin or responsibility, analytic evidence that characterize an object or substance. The process of fingerprint can be broken into the two sub-processes, namely gathering and classification of fingerprint and comparison of unknown fingerprint with the stored database of known fingerprint. While gathering fingerprint, it is essential to capture all the key characteristics of the object that reveal in the fingerprint. Capturing more details and traits helps in the comparison process. While capturing fingerprint, there may be a chance that a fingerprint can be improperly matched because of a subtle difference that can be easily mistaken. Fingerprint is a known technique in network security. Operating system fingerprint is a common task in any network assessment or any exercise. There are many techniques to perform operating system fingerprint. What makes operating system fingerprint successful and accurate is the fact that each operating system implements the TCP or IP stack slightly different. The way a system responds to malformed packets, either the presence of a error response or absence thereof. In one example of implementation difference, a detailed discussion of operating system fingerprinting or TCP or IP stack fingerprinting is presented in like remote OS detection via the TCP or IP stack fingerprint. The theory behind HTTP fingerprint is more or less in the same line, identifying HTTP servers by the implementation differences in the HTTP protocol. HTTP fingerprint gets slightly more complicated than TCP or IP stack fingerprint. The reason behind that is it is easily possible to customize the response of an HTTP server by sending or changing its configuration file or adding plugins or modules, or whereas customizing the behavior of the TCP or IP stack requires access to the network core or the kernel layer. Despite this difficulty, it is possible to devise tests to overcome the various customizable features on a web server. So HTTP fingerprint objective is to accurately determine the underlying web server platform, also attempt to uncover any plugin or app server, and based on implementation or assumption or peculiarities of the HTTP protocol specification. Fingerprint logic. So first one is decision tree based method, then statistical method, then neural network based method. Second one is a fingerprint engine. Set of test cases which is carefully chosen, response tree and weight vectors. So HTTP fingerprint technique, there are a couple of techniques for the HTTP fingerprint. So first one is deviation from HTTP RFCs, then behavior not specified by the HTTP RFCs, then default behavior or header field order, then implementation peculiarities, error analysis, cookie strings, and last similar to OS fingerprint. So accuracy is like choice of test cases, decision trees that are hard to scale, choice of result weights, scoring system, and training input set, which is for the neural network. So let's talk about mirroring a website. So before mirroring a website, you need to know that what is meant by this term. Basically, a mirror is an extract copy of a particular website, that is mirror website runs on a different server. In various situations during downloading software from like any software or any downloading website, you could have been asked to choose a closest mirror website especially to your location. There are plenty of things which play a key role in mirroring a particular website. Sometimes developers create a mirror website to reduce traffic from the main website, or they use other as a backup website. Social engineering is the act of exploiting human weakness to gain access to personal information and protected systems. Social engineering relies on manipulating individuals rather than hacking computer system to penetrate a target's account. Social engineering refers to manipulation of a target so that they give up key information. In addition to stealing an individual's identity or compromising a credit cards or bank's account, social engineering can be applied to obtain a company's trade secret or exploit national security. Attackers often use the surprisingly simple tactic in social engineering schemes, such as asking people for help. Another tactic is to exploit disaster victims by asking them to provide personally identifiable information such as maiden name, address, date of birth, social security number, missing or deceased loved one. So why? Because this piece of information can later be used to identity theft. Emails can be disguised to appear as a true or originated from the known sender when they are sent from a hacker. More elaborate tactics targeted by specific people might involve learning about their interest and their sending the target link related to their interest. So let's talk about sign of a social engineering attack. Social engineering can happen anywhere, online and offline. And unlike traditional cyber attack, whereby cyber criminals are stealthy and want to go unnoticed, social engineering are often communicating with us to plain sight. Consider these common social engineering tactics that might be right under your nose. Your friend sends you a strange message. Social engineer can pose as trusted individuals in your life, including a friend, boss, co-worker, even a banking institution, and send you a conspicuous or suspicious message containing malicious link or download. Just remember, you know your friend best, and if you send them if they send you something unusual, ask them about it. Your emotions are highlighted. The more irritable we are, the more likely we are going to our guard down. Social engineers are a great at stirring up our emotions like fear, excitement, curiosity, anger, guilt, and sadness. In your online interaction, consider the cause of these emotional triggers before acting on them. The request is urgent. Social engineers don't want you to think twice about their tactic. That's why many social engineering attacks involve some types of urgency, such as sweet cakes, and that's how you now new or cybersecurity software you need to download and to wipe a virus off your computer. The offer feels too good to be true. Even ever receive news that you didn't ask for. Even good news like winning a lottery or free course. Chances are like that are often seems to be good to be true. It's just that are potentially social engineering attack. You are received help and you didn't ask for. Social engineer might reach out under the guise of a company providing help for a problem that you have a similar to, like tech support scam, and consider you might not be a expert in that line. You might believe they are who that say and they are provided them access to your device or account. The sender cannot prove their identity. If you raise any suspicious with a potential social engineer, they are unable to prove their identity. Perhaps they won't do a video call with you. For instance, chances are like that they are not to be trusted. So here are a couple of the social engineering attack are common in our cyber attack. So almost all cyber attack have some sort of or some form of social engineering involved. The most social engineering technique also involve malware, meaning malicious software that unwillingly wreak havoc to our daily life. And first one is like scareware. As the name indicates, scareware is a malware that's sent to scare you to take action and to take action fast. It often comes with the form of pop-ups or email indicating you that act now to get rid of viruses or malware on your device. In fact, if you act, you might be downloading a computer virus or malware onto your system. So let me give you an example of scareware. So in 2019, an officer supplied and tech support company teamed up with a commits scareware act. The office supplier requires employee to run a rigged PC test on customer's device that would encourage customer to purchase unneeded repair service. Ultimately, the Federal Trade Commission ordered the supplier, the tech support company, to pay a 35 million settlement. Email hacking. It is our nature to pay attention to the message that people we know, and social engineering know this all too well. Commandeering email account and spamming contact list with phishing scam and messages. So an example of this is, so if your friend send you an email with the object like check this out, it's really cool, so you might not think twice before opening it by taking over someone's email account. A social engineer can make those into a contact list believing that they have received emails from somewhere they know. The primary objective includes spreading malware and tricking people out of their personal data. Access tailgating, also known as piggybacking. Access tailgating is when a social engineering physically trails or follow unauthorized individuals to an area they do not have access to. They can be as simple as holding an open door for someone else. Once inside, they have full reign to access device containing important information. Phishing. Phishing is a well-known way to grab information from an unwitting victim. How it typically works: a cyber criminal or phisher send a message to a target that asks for some type of information or action that might help with a more significant crime. The ask can be simple as encouraging you to download an attachment or verifying your email address. Worth noting is there are many forms of phishing that social engineering choose from, all with different means of targeting. Spam phishing attack takes a lot of form of big email sweep, not necessarily targeting a single user, Spear phishing target individuals. Perhaps an impersonate a trusted contact, whaling target celebrity on a high-level executive. DNS spoofing, also known as cache poisoning. DNS spoofing is when a browser is manipulated so that online users are redirected to malicious website bent on stealing sensitive information. In other words, DNS spoof is when your cache is poisoned and with some like malicious redirects. So let me give you an example. In 2018, a cloud computing company and its customer were victim of a DNS spoofing attack that resulted in around 17 million of cryptocurrency being stolen from the victim. Cybercriminal rerouted people trying to log out into their cryptocurrency account to a fake website that gathered their credentials to the cryptocurrency site and ultimately ruined their account. Baiting. Baiting is a built-up premise of someone taking the bait, meaning danger or dangling something desirable in front of a victim and hoping that they will bite. This occurs most often to peer-to-peer sites like social media, whereby someone might encourage you to download a video or music just to discover it's infected with malwares. So now, show your device. Physical breaches. As the name indicates, physical breaches are when a cyber criminal is in plain sight, physically posing a legitimate source of stealing confidential data or informing from you, or take the information from you. These might be as colleagues or a IT person. Perhaps they are disgruntled former employee, acting like they are helping you with a format problem on your device. In fact, they could be stealing your account login. Pretexting. What is pretexting? Is the use of a interesting pretext or ploy to capture someone's attention. Once the story hooks the person, the social engineer tries to trick the would-be victim into providing something of a value. Oftentimes, the social engineer is impersonating a legitimate source. Watering hole attack. A watering hole attack is a one-sweep attack that infects a single web page with malware. The web page is almost always on a very popular site, or a virtual watering hole. So if you will to ensure that malware can reach as many as possible. So let me give you an example because this might be tough to understand. So in 2014, a media site was compromised with a watering hole attack attributed to Chinese cybercriminals. They exploited vulnerabilities on a media site to create a fake widget that, when loaded, infected visitors' browsers with malware. The last one is quid pro quo. So this means a favor for favor, especially. So I give you this, you give me that. In this instance of social engineering, the victim cough up something sensitive information like account logins or payment method, or like your sensitive images from your cloud. So they act like the account or payment method, and then social engineer doesn't return their end of the bargain. So as an example, like a video gaming example, you might be on a video gaming forum and on the lookout of the cheat code to surpass a different level. Perhaps you wire money to someone selling the code just to be never hear from them again and never see your money again, but you already gave the money, so and you cannot take your cheat code or get your money back. So that's called quid pro quo. So that's the all of the types and ways that common cyber attack as a social engineering attack. When we talk about weaknesses in default configuration, the list of places this can go wrong is almost limitless. Very frequently you will see web servers and indeed web application frameworks configure suboptimally when it comes to security. There are various reasons for this. One of them is convenience. Sometimes security does make things harder. Another is backward compatibility. Sometimes framework need to remain compatible with their prior implementation and newer security, which paradigm is harder to implement without breaking that. And sometimes it can be for performance reasons. Security can have an overhead. Many network devices have default setting that emphasize the performance or ease of installation without triggers of security issues. Installation without adequate attention to correcting these settings could create serious potential problems. Some common configuration issues including like ineffective access control list failing to block intended traffic, default missing or old password, unneeded port or service that left active, user IDs and password exchange in a clear text, weak or unprotected remote access through the internet or dial-up service. Monitoring vendor announcement and adversaries combined with industry news service can identify the most common and best known vulnerabilities and often include the appropriate mitigation solution. There are 5 steps to a strong configuration, like creating a strong configuration that works to secure your vital business data is made easier when you take the following factor into action. To secure the endpoint, you need to complete all the browser and plugin that are in updates. Uses an update antivirus software protection that use like data execution prevention and use like endpoint threat detection and response. In 2016, 63% of the data breaches involved in password. In 2017, 81% of hacking related breaches use their weak or stolen passwords. The moral of the story is very simple. Any device with a weak or default password is a secure vulnerability. To reduce this risk, you must change default password to ensure that they meet criteria like following 8 to 6 character length that include lower length, upper length, a number and a unique special character like @ hash and like this. And it's better to be at 16 character length because that will take a lot of time to hacker to crack this password. So it's better to use a long character password that will help for own safety. If a user has an infinite number of times to attempt to log in, then their strong password became obsolete. Instead, you should track and limit the number of login attempts before the user is blocked from accessing the network. This simple step will not allow it to potentially hacking attempts, but also provide key insight why certain user accounts are being targeted. An authentication server can be used to manage LDAP, which is Leverage Alternative Authentication Mechanism, Active Directory, Radius and TACHCS. Additionally, two-factor authentication should be used to minimize potential vulnerability. RSA token, biometric certificate and smart card are all viable means of two authentication verification. Restrict network access to critical system, and more than 50% of inside data theft involved in misuse of administration privilege. To combat the risk, you should monitor administrator privilege function and immediately flag any anomalous behavior. These two simple actions can greatly mitigate the damage that could occur and should have a gain access to the network. The last one is the bottom line. Properly configure network that are key to data security, and doesn't matter how strong you think your IT security is if your network is improperly configured. Though endpoint protection, strong password and restricted number of login attempts and alternative authentication and limited access to the critical system, you can improve the configuration of your network by like this. So that's all about on weaknesses in default configuration and how you can set up or step for a strong configuration, so you don't get use of you don't get hacked your password or something like this. The risk of data leakage from user browser to external server has increased due to the prevalence of software as a service. Such data leakage is difficult to prevent because 1. Traditional firewalls cannot be used to prevent leakage without sacrificing the usability. 2. Coerced gain approaches cannot distinguish data flows between trusted SaaS provider and non-trusted services. And the last one is the detection of various types of sensitive data among massive amount of web traffic is difficult. Now let's talk about different types of information disclosure issues. So this couple of example will highlight a number of information disclosure issues in web application along with common mistakes made by developer and webmaster that can lead to a disclosure of confidential and sensitive information. The list also include example of each information disclosure security issues and explain how to find vulnerabilities. So first one is the banner grabbing, which is active reconnaissance. So banner grabbing is a type of attack during which the attacker sends the request to the system when they are attempting to attack in order to gain more information about it. If the system is not securely configured, it may leak information about itself such as server version, PHP, net version, OpenHS version, etc. like this. In most cases, banner grabbing does not involve the leakage of critical data but rather information that may aid the attacker during the exploitation phase of the attack. For example, if the target leaks the version of PHP running on the server that the version happens to be vulnerable to remote command or command execution because it wasn't updated, attackers may exploit the known vulnerability and take full control of the web application. So let's, as you can see in this picture, it is an example of banner grabbing. We can see that the NetSparker identified an old version of PHP running on the target host. You can also use the HTTP request or response tab in NetSparker to see the HTTP response from the target service in raw format, in which the old version of PHP is highlighted as well. As you can see, old version of PHP also highlighted. Source code disclosure. Source code disclosure occurs when the code of the backend environment of a web application is exposed to the public. Source code disclosure enables attacker to understand how the application behaves by simply reading the code and checking the logical flows, or hard-coded the username or password. The severity here depends on how much the code is exposed and how critical the leakage line of code are for the security of the web application. In short, source code disclosure turns a black box testing process into a more of a white box testing approach, since attacker get access to the code. Some source code repositories only allow users to see their content based on the authentication process. Such repositories are sometimes incorrectly configured, leaving their content accessible to anyone that, for example, has a particular email address, or failing and restricted access to contain certain amount that should have level of access. So in this picture, as you can see, the NetSparker scan has identified an SBN repository on the target website. So another example of this is when public code has sensitive information hard-coded in it, such as user credential or API secret keys. Attacker can easily use such information to sabotage these services or cause accessibility users or legitimate users. So as an example, this is the server-side request forgery, which is SSRF attack. So web browser knows how to parse the information they received thanks to the content type HTTP header that the web server sends in the HTTP responses. For example, in this picture we can see that the content type HTTP is set to text/HTML. So the browser parses the HTML and shows the output. So if the web browser is misconfigured and, for example, send the header contents type to text plain, this one, instead of the content type to text HTML, when serving an HTML page, the code will be rendered as plain text in the browser, allowing the attacker to see the source code of the page. In some circumstances, the web application can disclose file names or file path, thus revealing the information about the structure of the underlying system. This can happen due to the incorrect handling of user input, exceptions at the backend, and inappropriate configuration of the web server. Sometimes such information can be found or identified in the response of the web application, web errors, error pages, and debugging information like this. So related to the file name and file directory disclosure is directory listing in web server. This functionality is provided by default on web servers. When there is no default page to show, the web server returns a list of the files and directory present on the website. So if the default file name on the Apache web server is index.php, you have not uploaded a file called index.php to the root directory of your website, then the server will show a directory listing of the root directory instead of parsing to the PHP file as shown in here. Leaving such functionality enabled in production environment is a bad practice and can lead to a bigger security issues. Nowadays, many of that are aware of such functionality and should be disabled, so it is not common to see it. So let's now talk about excessive permission. So individuals are said to have a excessive permission when they have more rights on an IT platform than what is needed for them to achieve their business role. These are also risks with groups and system accounts having an excessive right. The point is that the level of the access increases, so do the risk of the organization if an account is compromised. The need to avoid excessive permission call to mind the whole security maxim and denying all rights and only allowing what is needed. A practice then can be saved the untold time and money. So there are 3 scenarios to avoid. 3 common scenarios which can be excessive permissions are granted. Like the first occurs when an organization is founded and there is only a handful of IT people or even just one person. This small staff has to perform many roles in order to keep up with their daily work and to backend with another up. One person might handle all the development, network management, and user support. As more people are hired, their rights minor and people before them, and as time goes by, everyone has mix of authorities. Second, some companies grant all the IT admin authority or give everyone high level access, as it seems to be easier to set up one account one time and then avoid the management required to deal with the restriction authorities. The problem is that their mentality has a siren song of improved agility but incurs additional risk of the organization. So in this situation, one must ask, are the association risks acceptable? And the third one is, some organizations have well thought out security policies. But when incident happens, additional permission are granted to a person that resolve the situation. But once fire is out, access is not disabled afterward. The permission creep is very common since some organizations don't have a proper controls in places to ensure that their rights are later removed, and also needs an additional control to routinely review accounts to ensure that the associate permissions are valid. So in all these cases, the right that certain individuals have the greater than what they should be for risks to be managed appropriately. As for USB or UBS or excessive rights, they can lead to malicious activity. On a greater scale, there are no risks stemming from human error when there are allowed permission greater than what their skill and knowledge can support. A great deal of unintentional harm is possible in any way. So in this lecture, we are going to be talking about debug settings. A fairly common example of web server misconfiguration is the server or the website being left in the debug mode. So in other words, being left in a state that designed to help the server admin or the developer figure out what's going wrong with the website and get the most internal information about the way. So it's executing and that node making its way to the production system. Now there are all sorts of good reasons why that should not happen the performance. One of them is frequently debug mode operates slower, but most importantly in the context of this lecture, debug mode can have a serious security ramification. This is a great example of Patreon. In 2015, Patreon suffered a major data breach. In fact, there are over 2 million subscribers on the service that had their personal information exposed. Even my friend was one of them. So my friend was in this breach, and clearly he was not happy about this particular reason that it was exposed, and this it was an website that being exposed with a debug setting. And in this particular case, it was a debug library for Python called workzoom, which was exposed with allowed the attacker to run arbitrary command on the system. Now let me show you this workzoom, because we are going to look at something else that's quite interesting. So this is the library of workzoom. It is a Python library that has been left on the Patreon website that was exploited by the attackers. Now there is not necessarily anything wrong with this library, but it's not meant to be a location that can be exposed production data with the general public. And the thing about this is that this was very well known risk. So for example, there was a blog post written just a year before this, which is this one. So in fact, it is very clear here that the remote code execution on means configuration system using workzoom was this the problem. The tool was meant for remote code execution and as a feature or as a debugging tool, not something that should be publicly accessible to all of us or to all the attacker to then exploit vulnerable using this. And this is not the problem just using Patreon. Let me show you. So let me just download over to this website, which is called Shodan. So Shodan is a very powerful search engine that finds internet connected device. Now that can be many different types of alliances connected to the web server, and clearly that also include web servers. Now here's what I need to show you is, if you go to in the search menu, hence on this search will run, they will get a result of servers running on the debug tool. So when I search this workzoom, you will get that there is a lot of them, and you know it's been running and works because it's written the responses header and as I have said. So when it is big this cause, because you really don't want to return anything in the response header, you don't have to. So in this case, it's nearly found, as you can see, 190k instance of this debug framework running on publicly facing websites. Now it's not immediately clear how many of these production system and how many are immediately exploitable in the same way that Patreon was, but it would be fair to say that about this result or this number of result, there are going to be significant number that are immediate risk. And this is a great illustration of how broad this problem is, because like as our previous slides shown, that Workzag is just one framework for on technology stack, and again here you got this many results about debug setting belonging non-production environment, preferably isolated from the public web. So they definitely do not belong in any web system that can expose production data, and Patreon was a perfect example for that. So that's debug setting. So in this lecture, we are going to be talking about splitting response of HTTP. So HTTP response splitting occurs when a web server fails to sanitize CR and LF character before the data is included in outgoing HTTP headers. To launch a successful exploit, the application must be vulnerable to the injection of a carriage or return and line feed characters, which are LF, ASCII 10 or /n, like this, which are used in the HTTP protocol to terminate a line that goes into the response header, and this technique is also referred to as CRLF injection in HTTP headers, and it gives attacker control of the remaining header and the body of the response that the application will be sent. The vulnerability allows the attacker to set arbitrary header, take control of the body, or break the response into two or more separate responses. Impact that depends on the technological stack, with outcome including cross-site scripting, cookie injection, CORS header injection, CSP bypass, cache poisoning attacks, and many more. Attacks such as cross-scripting and cookie injection are delivered by tricking the user into clicking on a malicious link. The injection code travels to the vulnerable website, which reflects the attack payload back to the user browser. The browser then executes the injected code because it came from a trusted server. So in a cookie injection scenario, imagine a web application that in case of error redirect to the user while reflecting get parameter in the location header. So this one is for this. So if the value is directly reflected inside the header with no sanitization or encoding, it might be possible for an attacker to inject the CRLF sequence to insert a new header or a new body. So in this example, the attacker tricks the victim into visiting this following URL. The result in the server sending the response to this victim is like this. The victim browser now considers the injected cookie as a legitimate, and depending on the application, that can be used to launch further attacks such as session fixation, or if the value of the cookie is somewhere reflected and not sanitized, like cross-site scripting attack. As with other similar injection attacks, HTTP response splitting can be mitigated by performing appropriate server-side validation and escaping this mitigation. The canonical way of the following two are carefully validate and sanitize any user provide content that might be used to compose the response header. And the second one is encode dangerous characters such as /r and /n. Website defacement is an attack in which malicious party penetrate a website and replace content on the site with their own messages. The messages can convey political or religious message, profanity, or any other inappropriate content that would impress the website owner, or a notice that the website has been hacked by a specific hacker group. Most website and web applications store data in environment or configuration files that affects the content that displayed on the website, or specified which template the page content is locked. Unexpected changes to this file can mean a security compromise and might signal a defacement attack. So website defacement has been around as long as the web itself has been around. And most of the defacement motives are like ruin a person or company's reputation, or take revenge, or prove a point, and then teach a lesson, or political reason, gain popularity on cyber security, or ransom, asking for money, and many of the similar motives there is. So let's talk about couple of the interesting website defacement example. So the first one is US government website that got defaced. Two Iranians defaced at least 51 US government websites in the year 2020 to show their resentment and anger toward the assassination of Iran's military general Qasem Soleimani. They posted various images of late Soleimani, messages against US government, and images of the current US president that was previously Donald Trump in offensive way. Then the later two Iranians were held guilty for the defacement attack, and these are the example of one of those pages. The beast of Minneapolis.org got hacked and was showing late Qasem Soleimani image and with a hacker email address, social media handle, and a message called Down with America. Ashley Madison website defacement by hacktivist. Some people want to spread a moral message in society and they choose a hacking as a method for this purpose. They are known as hacktivists. Like as an example, like hacker plus activist. So one of the popular website defacement example of such kind is Ashley Madison website, a famous site for extramarital affairs. A group of activists named Impact Group defaced Ashley Madison's website and put a message stating that the website must be permanently shut down. The hacker also publicly released the identity of 32 million members to teach them a moral lesson. And here's this what website looks like after the defacement. Indian's Defense Ministry website defacement. Some alleged Chinese hacker hacked the Indian Ministry of Defense, which is mod.gov.in, defaced it and made it non-functional. The website showed the message error and the website encountered an unexpected error, please try again later. The purpose behind this web defacement was not only to cause operation distribution or disruption, but also to impress the Indian government by indicating that they could not defend their defense ministry website. This is how the government Indian website looks like after the defacement. A Spanish presidency website EU2010.es was hacked and defaced by some hacker. Although this entire site was kept functional, the Spanish Prime Minister Jose Luis Rodriguez, that image was replaced with the comedian like Mr. Bean, which is Rowan Atkinson. with the popular TV shows and movies. The motive behind such website defacement was to just mock and embrace the Mr. Luis Rodriguez. So this is the actual screenshot how the website looked after the defacement. Another website defacement example that involves a reputed platform is Bitcoin's defacement. A hacker exploited a security vulnerability in Bitcoin's forum like bitcointalk.org using a SQL injection technique. The attacker defaced a website with images and messages promoting Cosbycoin and Bitcoin's competitor like in cryptocurrency. They also stole user information such as email address, hashed password and reading messages. So here's how this defacement looked. So this is a non-exhaustive list, but let's look at 4 common ways that website defaced. The number 1 is compromised credential. If an attacker has legitimate FTP credential, for example for a particular website, then clearly that gives them a massive head start in actually modifying the content of the site. Now those credentials can be obtained by many different ways like phishing attacks, reused other hashes, or like where those credential remains or credential retains, or simply just by brute forcing. And in fact we will look at an example later where the cross-site scripting is another. Then we will talk about the cross-site scripting, so which is another one I talked extensively about previous on my couple of lectures about the cross-site scripting attack. So now cross-site scripting typically occurs in a couple of different common ways. One being reflected across site scripting, where the attack exists in the request that the years frequently been streamed, but there is also persistent cross-site scripting where an attack exists in the database, and that's a great way of mounting it to facement the attack, because everybody who comes to the site will see the malicious script impact that will design the script or design the site. Then you consequently have the defacement in sufficient sandboxing. So I spoke previously about sandboxing. The concept of keeping logical process is totally isolated from each other. So insufficient sandboxing could lead to one website being able to modify to another. So particularly in a code-tentative environment such as shared hosting, this could lead to a defacement. And the one more, and the many example that causing the defacement is DNS hijacking. Now when we talk about the actual changing DNS record, this was no longer about modifying the actual site, it's about those records to another site, and then there are many ways of hijacking the DNS record. Early in our lectures I talked about the social engineering of GoDaddy in couple of my previous lecture in order for an attacker to gain control of the domain. So there's just one example, but certainly when you can point a host name to a different location website to defacement become very easy. So there is some good example of what defacement look like and some of the factors that can cause it. So that's all about the website defacement attack. Web cache poisoning is an advanced technique whereby an attacker exploits the behavior of a web server and cache so that a harmful HTTP response is served to the other users. Fundamentally, a web cache poisoning involves two phases. First, the attacker must work out how to elicit a response from the backend server that inevitably contains some kind of dangerous payload. Once successful, they need to make sure that their response is cached and subsequently served to the intended victims. A poisoned web cache can potentially be devastating means of distributing numerous different attacks like exploiting vulnerabilities such as XSS, JavaScript injection, open redirection, and so on. To understand how a web cache poisoning vulnerability arises, it is important to have a basic understanding how web caches work. If a server had to send a new response to every single HTTP request separately, this would likely overload the server, resulting in latency issue and a poor user experience, especially during busy period. Caching is primarily a means for redirecting such issues. The cache sits between the server and the user, which it saves cache than the responsible for the particular request, usually for a fixed amount of time. If another user then sends the equivalent request, the cache simply serves a copy to the cache response directly to the user without any interaction from the backend. This greatly eases from the load of the server by reducing the number of duplicate requests that it has to handle. So, how cache key works? To determine if something is already cached, caching server keep an index of all the cache content and use cache keys to look up request. A cache key is usually a simple string assembled from distinctive parts of a request, yielding a combination of a header value that should be sufficient to distinguish between cache and uncached request. Each caching mechanism will have its own way of building the cache key. The parts of requests that are included in the cache keys are called keyed input, and the rest of the requests are unkeyed input. All cache keys will include a list of the path and the host, but depending on the caching mechanism and application, other header value will also be used. Deliberately sending a modified request that definitely won't be in the cache is called cache busting, and is a crucial technique for investigating cache-related vulnerabilities and attacks. Using cache busting, a penetration tester can experiment with cache poisoning without affecting other users. So, there are several ways of impact of a web poisoning attack. So, there are a couple of ways to impact of a web cache poisoning. Like, first one is what exactly the attacker can successfully get cached, and the second one is the amount of traffic of the affected page. Several ways of modifying cache that depending on the cache mechanism. Here are a couple of them, and that will allow to web cache poisoning. The first one is reflected unkeyed headers. If the application directly reflects the value of a certain unkeyed header in the response, it opens an easy avenue to cache poisoning. Because the header is unkeyed, the value is not part of the cache key and played no part of deciding about the cache hits. If the attacker sends a request where only the header is maliciously modified, the response of this request will be cached, complete with the malicious payload. User subsequently request content that matches the same cache key will receive the malicious version of the cache. Second one is unkeyed port. If the port isn't part of the cache key, it may be possible to perform a denial of service attack, which is DOS attack, by poisoning the cache with an inaccessible port number. If the attacker sends a request that includes such a port number and the error response is cached, user requests the same URL without the port will immediately get the cache error instead of a expected page content. This will render the page inaccessible to the user, in effect of performing a subtle DOS attack only for a specific URL. Unkeyed request method. Sometimes the HTTP request method like GET, POST, PUT, etc. might not be a part of the cache key. If the application is also vulnerable to parameter pollution, it may be possible to send a POST request containing a malicious payload that modifies a parameter. Again, typically to perform a XSS, the poison response will then be cached and delivered to the client that sent a normal GET request matching with the same cache key. fat GET request. If an application accepts non-standard GET request that they have a body called like GET request, and the request body is both unkeyed and reflected in the response, this can present another avenue for cache poisoning. An attacker might then include a malicious payload in the GET request. The response will be cached, and user sending a regular GET request that matches the same cache key will receive the poisoned response. In some cases, it may also be possible to use the X HTTP method override header to trick the application into treating a fat GET request as a normal post request. And the last one is unkeyed query string. Finally, if the query string of a request is unkeyed and reflected on the response, it may be possible to inject a malicious payload into a query parameter and cache the response. Client sending a matching request with no query string would then receive a poisoning response. Because the attack is a typical string injection, you could say that this method is a way of turning reflected accesses into stored accesses. With the script stored in the web cache, while this technique is easy to spot if used directly, it may evade detection in more complex scenarios. So, how can you prevent like cache poisoning? So, let's give you a brief information about that. Like, web cache poisoning is one of those devious techniques that piggyback on a vital web infrastructure. More often than not, disabling web cache is not an option, either to perform a web reason or simply because it is too deeply embedded with the underlying performance. Because cache poisoning relies on cache key confusion, it is relatively easy to configure the cache engine to generate a cache key that will at least give a poisoning basics. So, to minimize the risk, you can use like web cache server to configure should be inoperated, like normalize the host's header, only cache the GET and head request, and then don't allow the GET request, and then there is an optional called disable cache headers. So, you can use this technique to minimize the effect of a cache poisoning. A brute force attack is a hacking method that uses trial and error to crack passwords, login credential, and encryption keys. It is a simple yet reliable tactic for gaining unauthorized access to individual accounts and organization systems and networks. The hacker tries multiple username and password, often using a computer to test a wide range of combination until they find a correct login information. The name brute force comes from an attacker using excessively forceful attempts to gain access to other user accounts. Despite being an old cyber attack method, brute force attacks are tried and tested and remain a popular tactic even today with hackers. Some attackers use application and script as brute force tools. These tools try out numerous password combinations by bypassing authentication processes. In other cases, attackers try to access web application by searching for the right session ID. Attacker motivation may include stealing information and infecting sites with malware or disrupting services. While some attackers still perform brute force attack manually, today almost all brute force attacks today are performed by bots. Attackers have list of commonly used credential or real user credential obtained via the security breaches or dark web. Bots systematically attack website and try this list of credential and notify the attacker when they gain the access. So, let's talk about the type of brute force attack. First one is simple brute force attack. It uses a systematically approach to guess that doesn't rely on an outside logic. Second one is hybrid brute force attack. It starts from an external logic to determine which password variation may be most likely to succeed. and then continues with the simple approach to try many possible returns. Dictionary attack guesses username or password using a dictionary of possible strings or phrases. Rainbow table attacks. A rainbow table is a pre-computed table for reversing cryptographic hash functions. It can be used to guess a function up to a certain length consisting a limited set of characters. Revenue brute force attack uses a common password or collection of a password against a many possible username. Targets a network of users of which the attacker had previously obtained the data. Credential stuffing uses previously known password username pairs, trying them against multiple websites, exploit the fact that many users have the same username and password across different systems. So there are many top brute force tools that hackers use that are mostly popular and even known to any people or cryptographic or even engineering people like us. So first one is aircrack ng. So it can be used on Windows, Linux, iOS and Android. It uses a dictionary of widely used password to breach the wireless network. John the Ripper. It runs on 15 different platforms including Unix, Windows and OpenBMS. Tries all possible combinations using a dictionary of possible passwords. Low-fat crack. It is a tool for cracking Windows password. It uses a rainbow tables, dictionaries and multiprocessors algorithm. Hashcat. It works on Windows, Linux and Mac OS. It can perform a simple brute force that are rule-based and hybrid attack. DevGrohl. It is an open source tool for cracking Mac OS. It can be distributed across multiple computers. And the popular tool is Encrack, a tool for cracking network authentication. It can be used on Windows, Linux and BSD. Today, individuals possess many accounts and have many passwords. People tend to repeatedly use a few simple passwords which leaves them exposed to brute force attack. Also, repeated use of the same password can grant access to many accounts. Email account protected by weak password may be connected to additional accounts and can also be used to restore password. This makes them particularly valuable to hackers. Also, if users don't modify their default router password, their local network is vulnerable to attack. Attackers can try a simple default password and gain access to the entire network. Strong passwords provide better protection against identity theft, loss of data, unauthorized access of account, etc. like this. So it's better to always use strong password. To protect your organization from brute force password hacking, enforce the use of strong password. Password should be like never use information that can be found online, like have as many as character as possible. More than 16 will be good. Combine letters, numbers and symbols. Be different for each user account and avoid common patterns. As an administrator, there are methods that you can implement to protect user from brute force password cracking, like lockout policy. You can lock account after several login attempts and then unlock it as an administrator. Progressive delay. You can lock out accounts for a limited amount of time, and after failed login attempt, each attempt make the delay longer. CAPTCHA. Well-known tools like reCAPTCHA we can see on almost all websites. It requires user to complete single task to log into a system. Users can easily complete this task while brute forcing tool cannot. Requiring strong password. You can force user to define long and complex password. You should also enforce periodical password changes. Two-factor authentication. I think it is a must for every people. I strongly suggest for every people to use in all website that has a two-factor authentication. You can use multiple factors to authenticate identity and grant access into accounts, and it is a life-saving. I am again saying it is a life-saving of a option using a two-factor authentication. Automation can make your life a whole lot easier as an ethical hacker, and there are a bunch of different tools out there that can enormously useful. And I want to touch briefly on some of those ones that I personally used and loved. And I have used those throughout of my previous lectures or previous use cases that I most probably used using this software or tools. And I have all those use these tools on a ethical web application. So tools like first one is just you saw PART-20, very powerful and simple, and the most beautiful thing it is that it is fully free edition available, and a very full feature commercial also available if you want to pay for get more features. Another one that's very useful is WhatsApp. That is totally free and it is a great dynamic analysis. Tools that can also used for proxy request like warp and mount similar sorts of attacks. You will also saw me using Fiddler quite intensively. That's a great HTTP proxy debugging tools that allows you to intercept requests and then recompose them, that taking the original client out of the picture and taking over the rule. So HTTP layer moving back to more feature automation tools. And I love using the Netsparker. That's a great way, just simply plugging in a URL, letting it go into a bunch of analysis on the website that you are testing, and then returning the result in a very easily human consumable fashion. Akintouch is a great good example. A very similar class of app, both that one and the other Parker are that are commercial offering though. They do cost money to get you into this. So, and there is another which I most probably use the most, which is Nmap, a very fantastic tool, inevitably that canonical tool to the network analysis. It's a great for looking at the sort of services that are running, which port are open, what machines are on the network, and it's extremely powerful, and it's usually the first step for looking at how web servers behave over the network. So let's talk about some of the available penetration tools like Nmap. That I was saying, the Nmap network is gonna enables the pen tester to determine the types of computer servers and hardware the enterprise has on the network. The fact that these machines are identifiable via these internal probes is in itself a vulnerability. Attacker use this information to lay on the ground of attack. So I talked about PART-20, so let me just define more. So PART-20 is another popular web application for penetration testing tool. It maps and analyzes web application, finding the exploited vulnerabilities. So according to the PART-20 web technology, port trigger. So most of them I previously showed you how to use them, and I think almost all of you know how to use these tools, because I think I covered all of those tools, because you will want to select these tools of where your most costly vulnerability lie. So once you find your vulnerability, it is important to patch them. So if there is a patch available, secure around. If it is not, then just go. So these penetration testing tools will do their job, and that's all for a brief streamline testing with automation. So we logged into our DBWA web page using a admin username and password as password to get access this DBWA's web server. So let's go and set up or create a database just to make sure everything is working. So you can go set up and then create or reset your database. So I have already done that, so my database is already resetted. So now what we have to do is we have to turn our DBWA security as low, because we will use low security so that we can try a few different types of attack. So the first one is going to be a cross-site scripting or XSS reflected attack. So I am using on my Kali Linux as and Firefox in this machine. So let's see how the script works. So if I say my name like Akash, then submit, I can see that first of all it does a couple of things. It says hello Akash, and because I'm using low security, not only it reflects on the screen just to print whatever I type, it also include in the URL, as you can see. So it named in here. So what I said my name is like another one, which is Tanjum. So if I say my name Tanjim in here, let's see what it does. As you can see, it also printed my name in screen. So as you can see, I have already tapped a script down here. So I'm just going to use a script, which is a very simple script, which is this one, which is a very simple script. So in here I am keeping it at blank, so it will print and show as blank, and it will show a pop-up also. So let's run the script. As you can see, it shows nothing in here because the brackets had been blank. So if I say something like your site has been hacked in those blank brackets, so let's see what it does. As you can see, it also shows as a pop-up that, and also got notified that your site has been hacked. Because it actually ran this script, and I put like a text inside of this script, which is, as you can see, this text or this show up in here whenever you run this in our reflected XSS screen. So whatever we put in those brackets will be printed and show you as a pop-up every time you run the script. So let's start this on our XSS store. So you can do whatever you like to name in here. You have to put a name, like let's name nothing as a random, and let's put the same text that we put in our reflected XSS. So let's put in here and sign the guest book. And as you can see, you have been hacked. But the thing is, it just not only loaded in, so every time you load this page it will show up. As you can see, every time it will show up, even not only from this machine, it will show up even from another machine. So as you can see, I am currently on, this is my, so let's first log out. So this is my Ubuntu machine, so this is another machine. So let's log in again and go to accessory store. As you can see, so every time anyone or any person visit this page, this will load up. So everything you did in those script will show up in here, and every other machine, even anyone with that page can show up this. So every person that visit this page will show up this message or the script that you run on this text field. So we're saying all of this because it's stored my script in this page. That's why it's every time I come to this page, it will load up this script and it will show up this message. So instead of putting a comment every time I come this page, so there is a pretty simple example here. Is just one simple script that you can insert that really a complex script in here that pop up as a fake or virus. So you can pick a script that will save as a virus or any payload. You can simply just run this, and every time any person who will visit this page, then they will be affected with that payload. So that's how this XSS stored and XSS cross-site vulnerability works. So it's all about your script, how or what script you load in this text field. So it will work on any script you want. Like if you have a script like this, so if you want to if you don't want to just show this text box, you can just simply use windows dot location. So what this will does is it will simply, after loading this page, because this is already saved in our database, so after loading this, it will simply go to this website. So sometimes we see in other or any websites that we visit that sometimes when you click a website, it simply or randomly open another website. That's because they use a script with that page similarly like this, that will simply go to the specific website that we typed in here. So simply this will redirect this web address that someone or some person put on their script. So that's how this actual XSS script works. So unfortunately, we can do even more complicated things besides just alert and with another just window location, and we can actually set people up for hacking through a company's web page or website. An easy way in PHP to protect against this is to strip the tags so that no one can interact directly to the web page. We'll talk more about that in our next lectures to see how this SQL injection examples works. So SQL injection and SQL injection blind we'll be seeing in our next lectures.